Mr. Edoardo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I wish to thank my friend, Mr. Baidakov, for inviting me here. It's been a very interesting session today, and my mind is so full of ideas and thoughts, so it's going to be difficult to stick to my own presentation. Just one quick word on long-term investment in Europe. I come from Cassa depositi prestiti, which is a large development bank. In 2009, we created, together with other large development banks in Europe, KfW from Germany, Cassa Depot from France, and European investment banks, the Club of Long-Term Investments. And we've been lobbying and trying to get through the thoughts of the need for long-term investments in Europe. And we succeeded quite much, and the European Commission is coming out with a green paper by the end of November. The OECD has launched a big research project on long-term investments, and I just spoke 2 days ago with Professor Padoan, who is Chief Economist and General Secretary of the OECD, and he told me that the next G20 in Moscow, he will bring two issues, energy and long-term investment. So I think that the topic is, the message went through. I want to give a very quick, of course, lunch is coming soon, and I want to be very quick, a very quick view on very long-term perspectives of global economy. We are going through a huge transformation in the next 30, 40 years, something that human civilization has never seen before. We had great revolutions, we had industrial revolution, we had the French Revolution, Protestant, but we never had something like what we are going to have in the next 30, 40 years. So I'm going to try to give some numbers. Of course, forecasts are always full of uncertainties, and the unexpected is always upon us, so we don't know what's going to happen, but this is, I'm going to give some numbers on projections on 2050. So we're talking about 30, 40 years, and 2050 is tomorrow, really. On GDP, on public debt, on investment and savings. So this is GDP, economic GDP today, and you can see we have the Western world is growing at very low rates, around 1–2%, and then we have the rest of the world, which is growing at a much higher rate, 5–6–7%. What it means is that more than half of the world is going through a phase very similar with what Western world went through after Second World War. So huge growth, huge investments, and it's going to be very difficult and very challenging, and will completely change the map of power, the map of forces, and it's going to be very difficult to, the big challenge is going to be, well, environmental. Someone says we need 5 Earth to support these huge changes. Are going to be of world governance, of course, and we need general principles. We need global legal standards, because it's true that we have to share a global constitution, otherwise it's going to be very difficult to build a new world order around such huge changes. So we look at public debt, we see that the Western world is they peaked up to 100% of GDP. And we see that the rest of the world usually has much lower public debt to GDP ratios. And they have much lower public GDP ratios also because they have higher growth, so they can sustain this. That means, and they also have a much higher rate of creation of financial savings. And this means a lot, because public debt is another force. I mean, if someone owns part of your debt, owns also part of your choices. So the emerging worlds and the developing worlds will somehow have power and force on the Western world, and we hope the Western world will not react militarily as it had done in the past, but probably cannot, because we know that it's not possible to have world anymore. The world population is going to grow very much, and of course we have a Western world which is old, which grows, which is scared, and which is highly indebted. On the other hand, we have a huge emerging developing world which is growing very much, is young, and is full of hopes, and this will make a big change in the coming years. This is 1970, the distribution of global growth, and you see that North America and Western Europe made most of half of the world GDP. If we go in 2010, then we see that the Asian countries have got 28%, and Europe and North America are just going down. And if we go 2050, we see that Asian emerging countries have about 50% of the world GDP. Africa has 12% of the world GDP. Western Europe 7%, North America 11%, and so and so. And this is quite impressive. This is going to completely change the map of the world, clearly. GDP is going to grow by 5 times from now to 2050, 5 times, which is a huge increase. Citibank Global Institute calculated that in China they will build for the next 30 years as one city as large as New York every year for 30 years. And India will build a city like New York every other year for the next 30 years. So huge infrastructure, huge challenges in urbanization and social cohesion and so and so. And this is the evolution of savings. 1990, you see United States, Europe, Germany, Japan, emerging countries 18%. If we go to 2011, we already have the emerging countries getting to 30% of the global savings, and United States, Europe. And if we go to savings again, you see that advanced economies are very low rates of savings, emerging economies much higher, and of course, oil producers much higher. And if you go on savings in Western and advanced economies, we see that it's going down, very much down. Again, this is demand of investments. 20% in the United States is 1990. Okay, if you get to 111, we see that emerging countries are already 27%. China is 22%, about half of the world demand for investments are outside the Western New World. And this is going to create global imbalances that are going to be difficult to be dealt with. So what to do? Well, some things I said, a great transformation, a huge transformation. We have to find a way to live together. This is the only planet we have. There's no other way to go. We are a bit like in a condominium, the condominium world. We have to find a way to adjust each other. I do believe that general principles are very, very important, and I do believe that G20 is the beginning of something. I also believe that global legal standards or an economic world constitution might be a solution, because it is true that principles is what we have to do. So if we do a bit like what Rhodes says, like a veil of ignorance, we all step ahead and we say, the table of Moses, a few basic principles we all agree with, would be already a big beginning. Okay, 2 minutes. So there's going to be a huge demand for capital investments. There's not going to be enough savings to cover that demand. So the interest rates on investments are going to raise, and there's be greater competition on the global markets to get savings. And it is very important that these savings go for, and they will go probably for infrastructure, for energy, and for... Much of the savings can come from long-term investors, such as pension funds, insurance companies, which are themselves long-term investors because they have to pay long-term pensions and their life insurance. So much can be done also with regulation, fine-tuning. The devil is in details. So we've been doing a lot in Europe to change Basel III or to change regulation for insurance companies so that they have higher interest in attract long-term investments or infrastructure as an asset class. So the challenge is huge, and in this forum we heard so many interesting things. Of course, most of the problems, I believe, are ethical, are spiritual, are of values, are of community, and but the economics is telling us a story which for our sons and our grandsons It's not going to be easy. I've just had a baby who's 1 year old, and she'll be my age when in 2100. So we really have to try to leave a better world to them, or to save this world as it is, because we never had such a huge transformation in the history of mankind. Thank you.
Perhaps, Edoardo, can I invite you to sit in the front, and I could ask Paulo to speak, because your present.